Is that any better? All right. We're in First Peter chapter 1, and we're in the first paragraph. So we've gone through the first two sections of it, two-thirds of that first paragraph, where Peter lays out his opening thesis that is going to be the basis of much or most of this epistle that he's writing. And we've seen that it's a very simple thesis. And the thesis is you have a tremendous inheritance. And the point that Peter's trying to make, and we'll find this as we look at this epistle further, is that this should radically transform the way you think about things, the way you see things, what you perceive as being reality itself. Because let me put it this way: if it is true, would be the better way of saying this. If it is true that you have this enormous, unblemishable, unfading, uncorruptible inheritance in eternity that you will access after your death, well, then that becomes what is truly real. And everything that is right now that is temporal and fading and corrupting and it's withering and dying before your very eyes, all of that is not what should be seen as real. It doesn't mean that you're in the matrix. That's not what I mean by it's not real. It doesn't mean that you're in some type of video. What it means is it's not lasting. It's not something you should actually be ordering your life for. There's so many things that have the sense of reality to them, but when you consider them in perspective, you say, that's not real. What's real are things that last. And the longer they last, the longer that they remain unchanged, the more real they should actually be in our minds. In the sense that we should order our life for those things that are lasting. And that's the premise of much of Hebrews. Hebrews, even though that's not the main point of Hebrews, Hebrews deals with that issue a lot also. That we have these things that are unchanging, and we should be living in the faith, like the faith of those people of Hebrews 11, and that they looked at what they could not see. They reached out for the things they could not touch, and they ordered their life as if those things were true, and the things that they were experiencing at the moment were not true. That's how they lived their life. That's how Abraham lived his life, right? He sought a city whose builder and maker was God. That's what he was looking for. And so he was fine living in a tent in the desert because there was this city that he saw that you couldn't see. There was this possession that he had that you couldn't touch, and that was what was real for him. And he ordered his life. And so Abraham had a way of perceiving, of a perspective about his surroundings, about his companions, about himself, about his life, about everything that there was. He had a perspective that was informed by that perception of spiritual reality. And Peter is trying to get you to have that same perspective. It is a change of mind, and it's one of the hardest things to accomplish, right? To have a change of mind, to see things. You realize that so many people have miserable lives, and it isn't because they have to. It's not because they're living in a miserable time or because they're living in a miserable circumstance. It has nothing to do with that. It's just because they're thinking about things the wrong way. And if you could learn to think about things the right way, it would radically transform everything about your existence. Everything. Just thinking about them the proper way. Now, it doesn't help if it's not true. That is delusion. And that is not at all what we are trying to encourage you to do, to fool yourself, to psychologically trick yourself, right? To psych yourself out. That is not helpful. If it is not real, if it's not true, then it's not helpful. That's why Paul said that if Christ didn't raise again from the dead, we're the most miserable of men, and our faith is vain. It must be real. And it must be true. And we don't have, this is not about that, but this is why you should analyze the arguments in the first general epistle of John, because he deals with that issue, and we've talked a little bit about that, but he deals with the epistemological approach to Christianity, whereby we ascertain if the claims of Christianity are in fact true, and how you can know that. First John deals with that. You really should read it and think about it deeply, because it's very important that when we talk about changing the way we think about things, we are talking about changing the way we think about things that are true and real. It's very important they be true and real. So Peter is trying to tell you, you have an inheritance, tremendous inheritance. It cannot be, it's indescribable. There's no words by which we can paint it for you. It is enormous and unfading and unchanging and unblemished. It's a tremendous thing. You have that inheritance because you're a child of God Himself. Not through immigration, not through adoption. You were born by the Spirit of God into the family of God. And you are a son of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. If you believe that, imagine the difference it would make every day in your life. No more begging from anybody for anything. Why would you? It may not appear what you are at the moment, but if you know what you are, then it would change your life. That's what Peter's trying to get across to you. This is an outlandish claim. It's an outlandish claim. One that has no apparent evidence at the moment. When you go home today and you look in the mirror, you don't see a prince. You see a pauper. You don't see somebody with a tremendous inheritance. You see somebody with a mountain of debt. There doesn't seem to be any connection there that you can look at and say, okay, here's the evidence of this. So Peter, in this last third of this first paragraph, wants to offer you an incredible piece of evidence of whether or not what the claims he's making are true, because they smack of delusions of grandeur. I mean, he could easily be thought of as an apothecary of some type of psychological, hocus pocus, that he's some type of psychological magic beans that he's selling you, that, you believe them to be true, and it's just some fantasy. It sure sounds like a fantasy. It's particularly so if you put it in the historical context in which it's written, where you have all these Gentiles scattered around. They're nobodies. They have nothing. They live in squalor. And he's telling them, you are the heirs of the riches of God. And it sounds like he's just selling them the way Marx called it, the opium of the masses. Some alchemistic, formula where they can turn the dung of their life into something glorious. So we have to ask, is there any evidence for this claim that Peter's making? It's an amazing claim. It's crazy. It's crazier than if someone came up and said, did you realize that you were actually the long-lost, separated cousin to the richest person in the world? Did you know that? They're looking for you. They have all this money and they want you to live in their palace. That actually makes more sense than what Peter is claiming. That actually is more likely. And that's not likely at all. Don't go running home to your mailbox to see if that letter's there. It's not. You're nobody. Nobody's missing you. You're not long lost from nobody. You're just a nobody. What evidence does he offer? Well, let's look at that, because I think it's pretty interesting. And we're going to start reading in verse 10 of 1 Peter chapter 1. This is the last section of that paragraph, of the first paragraph of the epistle. He says, of which salvation the prophets have inquired and searched diligently, who prophesied of the grace that should come unto you, searching what manner of time the Spirit of Christ which was in them did signify, when it testified beforehand the sufferings of Christ and the glory that should follow, unto whom it was revealed that not unto themselves, but unto us they did minister the things which are now reported unto you by them that have preached the gospel unto you with the Holy Ghost sent down from heaven, which things the angels desire to look into. This is his evidence. You are the heirs, he says. So much so that all the amazing characters of the Bible that you look up to, their entire existence was about you. They didn't minister those things for themselves. They didn't have full understanding of them even. That's an incredible thing to think about, and it's an extremely difficult thing to fathom in our minds. We think of the characters of the scriptures. We think of Moses, and we think of Abraham, and Elijah, and Jeremiah, and John the Baptist, and we think, well, surely, those are the people that God really was focusing on. And Peter says, let me explain to you how big this inheritance is. That the people that you think are the focus of God are not. They're just the lawyer that shows up to read the will. They're just the arbiters. They show up and open up the little envelope to tell you what you won today. That's a very strong claim. That's a difficult thing, at least for me, to negotiate in my mind because it doesn't seem that way. And it seems like he's making a claim that you wonder, where is he getting this from? Where is he getting the idea that Moses really was not doing anything for himself or even for the people at his time, but everything that Moses did, everything that Isaiah did, Jeremiah, all of that was for me. How full of yourself do you have to be to think that? But that's the claim he's making. If that is a true claim, then you really are the heir of God. If that's true. If that's true, how could you even doubt that there is an enormous, amazing inheritance reserved in heaven for you if God says, everything I did up to this point, I did it for you. And they all existed and lived and preached and suffered for your sake, not for theirs. So much so that I didn't even explain to them what I was doing. Could that be true? Could we be that crucial? Could we have been born at just that right time? Is that even possible? Where would Peter be getting that? When you start reading the scriptures, you find out this is not uncommon. This is actually stated all over the place. This isn't some epiphany that Peter had. He is merely drawing on countless passages that state that very thing. Perhaps, like many Christians, you're unaware of those. So let's look at them. Let's look at them today. The claim that Peter's making is that the prophets, the priests, the kings, the apostles, and the angels all were ordained to administer your inheritance. That's his claim. He's saying that these were all the schoolmasters of Galatians chapter 1. Chapter 4, verse 1. Remember when Paul in Galatians 4 says that as long as the heir is a child, he deferreth nothing from a servant, though he be Lord of all, but is under tutors and governors until the time appointed of the Father? That's what Paul said. Who is that heir? Us. And who are those tutors and governors who are mere servants serving the heirs? Those are the prophets, the priests, the kings, and the apostles, and the angels. Even so we, he says, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of the world. But when the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. And because ye are sons, God sent forth the Spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, that is, Father. Wherefore thou art no more a servant, but a son. And if a son, then an heir of God through Christ. You're the heir. And all of those that we think of the great people in the faith are the servants administering your inheritance. Is there an inheritance? Well, that inheritance is so real and so great that Moses, Elijah, Isaiah and Jeremiah, John the Baptist, Paul and Peter, they're just the administrators of it. They're the executors. Yes, it's real. They're the flaming ministers of Hebrews, chapter 1, I believe it is, verse 13. We're speaking of the angels, chapter 2, I think it is. Yeah, it'd be chapter 2, verse 13. But to which of the angels said he at any time, sit on my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool? Are they not all ministering spirits sent forth to minister to them who shall be heirs of salvation? What are the angels? Well, Paul says earlier on in the book, they're greater than us. We, humanity, was made lower than the angels in almost every way. And yet he says, what are the angels? They're just ministers for those who shall be heirs. It's where we get the concept of guardian angels. It's not a wrong concept. It's absolutely what Paul is saying in Hebrews. Angels were created with tremendous power and authority in every visible way, greater than you, and yet they are put there to serve you, the heir of salvation, because your inheritance is real. These are the faithful stewards of 1 Corinthians chapters 3 and 4. Paul writes in chapter 3, verse 18, let no man deceive himself. If any man among you seemeth to be wise in this world, let him become a fool, that he may be wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God, for it is written, he taketh the wise in their own craftiness. And again, the Lord knoweth the thoughts of the wise, that they are vain. Therefore, let no man glory in men, for all things are yours. Whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas or the world or life or death or things present or things to come, all are yours, and ye are Christ's, and Christ is God's. We think of the apostles very highly, and in many respects that is proper. But there is a concept or a thought about the apostles that Christianity has messed up. Thank you. It's easy to think that you as a Christian belong to them. Paul deals with this previously and after this, in this very text in 1 Corinthians, a passage that we look at and we find in it, how would we put it, argument against the idea of denominationalism, right? I'm of Paul. No, I'm of Peter. I'm of Apollos. I'm of Christ. And we eschew that. We don't want that in our church. We don't want that kind of thinking in our minds and in our church. But many times in our hurry to criticize denominationalism, we miss the point that Paul is making. A much more nuanced, a much more profound point, a life-changing point. What he is saying is, you know what's wrong with saying, I'm of Paul, I'm of Apollos, I'm of Peter, I'm of Cephas, I'm of Christ? You know what's wrong with saying that? We think, well, it's because it's divisive. It is divisive, and that's wrong. But that's not the problem. The problem is it's not right. It's not accurate. It's incorrect. Paul says, you can't be mine because I'm yours. You can't be Peter's because Peter is yours. You're not understanding who you are. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of your very spiritual nature. When you say, I'm Peter's, you are saying, I'm nobody. Peter is the guy. Paul is the guy. I just follow them. Peter and Paul is saying, no, you don't understand. You are not understanding. We are the executors of the will. You are the heir. You're the son of the testifier, not me. I serve you. This is the problem with what he's saying in 1 Corinthians. This is the problem. And because we don't understand it, it belies the entire ignorance and misinformation in our minds that drives our subservience to the world and our dependence on sin. Because we don't understand who we are. You would never think that you belong to Peter if you understand that you're a child of God. How could you possibly be Peter's? Why would you take that demotion? Now, Peter, Paul, James, and John, they understood it. They understood it perfectly well. They understood their role. Paul talks about it in 1 Corinthians chapter 4. We'll read an extended passage here. And these things, brethren, I have in a figure transferred to myself and to Apollos for your sake. So he's saying, I'm going to use me and Apollos as an example of what I'm talking about and try to help you understand what's really going on. That ye might learn in us not to think of men above that which is written. That no one be, for who maketh thee to differ from another? And what hast thou that thou didst not receive? Now if thou didst receive it, why dost thou glory as if thou hast not received it? Now, an addendum, right? That's like an aside. He always does that. Let's skip that and look what he's saying. Now, ye are full. Now, ye are rich. Ye have reigned as kings without us. And I would to God ye did reign, that we also might reign with you. You see what he says? It's what he's saying in chapter 3. At the end, what we read. All things are yours. Whether it's Paul or Apollos or Cephas or the world or life or death or things present or things to come, all things are yours. They're not theirs. They're not the apostles. The church isn't of the apostles. The apostles are of the church. He says in Ephesians, right, Christ ascended into heaven and gave gifts unto men. And the gifts he gave are apostles and doctors and preachers. Those are the gifts to the church. He didn't give the church to the apostles. He didn't leave and say, hey, I'm going to leave you guys this church and you're going to administer it. You're going to be the bosses, right? This is going to be your little fiefdom, your little kingdom. No. He birthed the church and gave apostles to it. That's what Christ meant when he said that if you're going to be great, you're going to have to be a servant. Because it doesn't belong to you. You belong to it. You work for the church doesn't work for you. Saying that the apostles belong to you. You think that about yourself? When you look in the mirror, is that the perception you have of yourself? That you are that fullness of time? That you are that crux in all of history? That everything that God has ever done has been for you? Probably not. We don't tend to think about ourselves that way. But that's what Paul is saying. Look what he says about himself back in chapter 4. He says, for I think that God has set forth us, the apostles, last, as it were appointed to death. For we are made a spectacle unto the world and unto angels and unto men. We are fools for Christ's sake, but ye are wise in Christ. We are weak, but ye are strong. Ye are honorable, but we are despised. Even unto this present hour we both hunger and thirst, and are naked and buffeted, and have no certain dwelling place, and labor, working with our own hands. Being reviled, we bless. Being persecuted, we suffer it. Being defamed, we entreat. We are made as the filth of the world, and of the offscoring of all things unto this day. Even from the very beginning, there was an incredible distinction, a difference between the apostles and the believers. For the most part, the believers did not have the same troubles the apostles did. And the apostles did not resent that. That was their job. They had been chosen by Christ to be the final executors of this will. And you were chosen by Christ to be the heir. You have an incredible inheritance. So much so you say, how much of an inheritance? How great of an inheritance is it? How radically should it transform my way of thinking? It is such a tremendous inheritance that God, Christ, brought together all the prophets, all the apostles, and all the holy angels to be the executors of that inheritance. Nothing less would suffice. That's a pretty good inheritance. You're a pretty important person. I know you don't feel important. I know you don't look important. I know often you don't act important, but you are. You're the focus of all of God's plans and purposes. You don't live that way. I don't live that way. You don't make decisions like that. I realize that. Neither do I. That's what Peter's trying to correct. That's what Peter's trying to fix. Because that's his job. His job is place. He is your tutor. He is your governor. It's his job to get you ready to enter into the courts of heaven, not as some pauper, not as some beggar that happened to skate under the cracks of the gates, but to march in like the son of the king that you really are. You know what differentiates those two categories? Just the way you think about yourself. That's the difference. Jesus talked about this also in Luke chapter 10. Verse 21, he says, "In that hour, Jesus rejoiced in spirit and said, I thank ye, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that thou hast hid these things from the wise and the prudent, and hast revealed them unto babes. Even so, Father, for it seemed good in thy sight. All things are delivered to me of my Father, and no man knoweth who the Son is but the Father, and who the Father is but the Son, and he to whom the Son will reveal him. And he turned him unto his disciples and said privately, Blessed are the eyes which see the things ye see. For I tell you that many prophets and kings have desired to see those things which ye see, and have not seen them, and to hear those things which ye hear, and have not heard them." That's you. Kings, priests, and prophets have longed to hear what you hear, and see what you see, and be in your position. And you know what it says in Hebrews was revealed to them? And what he says in Peter that was revealed to them? That it wasn't for themselves that they spoke of those things. Can you imagine that? Here you are, one of these magnificent prophets, one of these powerful apostles, one of these glorious kings and priests, and you got all these amazing things that are going to happen, and you know about them before they happen. And you're talking about them is going to be this amazing city and this incredible kingdom and all of this wealth and power and glory and honor and praise. God himself says, I am going to praise some people. And you start asking, is it me? How embarrassing. Is it me, Lord? And he says, not even close. Not even close. How did Jesus put it? Tells the leaders of the Jews, tells them, you're going to see the Gentiles sitting in the kingdom, and you're not going to be there. Ouch. Ouch. You think, boy, that's awkward. A little bit. Yeah, that's a little awkward. I can't tell you why. It certainly isn't because you're better than them. But for God's eternal purpose, he elected you as the heir. And chose them to tell you about it. And you say, is that inheritance real? Better be. These are the same legion of faith that we find in Hebrews. You realize what that chapter's about? That chapter's about the same thing Peter's trying to get across to you. Same thing. Here you have these people he's talking about. He starts off earlier on, but here you have all these people like Abraham, the prototype of it. Anyone who looks out across the desert and sees him with his little camel train going through the desert, they're not thinking, there goes the heir of God. They're thinking, look at that lost nomad out there living in the dust, out there living in a tent. What a waste. And he says, Abraham had a vision. There was something future, something in eternity that was worth sacrificing everything and anything for now. And that is the example of faith that we're given. And that's why he says we're surrounded by this cloud of witnesses. It does not mean that there are people in heaven looking down on you. That's not what that means. That is just taking that way, way out of its natural meaning. What it means is we have all these people that we can draw on their life and their history and their story to draw a parallel to and say they are testifying to us. Their life is a testimony to us as to how we should live. That's that great cloud of witnesses. Great cloud of testimony, of example. What is the example in Hebrews 11? He goes through all those people and everything they suffered and everything that happened to them. And he says, and you know what? They all died without receiving what they wanted. That's the example. Because they knew that there was something real and eternal in the future. That's how you need to live your life. You need to live your life the way they did. You need to realize you are a son of God. You're an heir of His kingdom. You have an unfading and uncorruptible inheritance reserved in heaven for you. And I know I keep saying that, but we must reiterate it because it all seems so unbelievable. And it's so easy to say, that's crazy. That's crazy talk. That's nonsense. How could that possibly be true? I'm just going to get what I can get now. I'm going to live for what I can live for right now. Because that's real. That's immediate. There's no risk in that. Of course, that's silly. Because there's tremendous risk in that. Because you can lose it all real fast too. Right? Tremendous risk. But it's easy to think that way. And what Peter, along with all the other executors of God's will, are trying to explain to you, you need to embrace who you truly are. Not some psychological babble. I mean embrace who you truly are as a son of God. Your true spiritual nature. God of heaven, Jehovah, the Father, loves you. His entire purpose through all of time and creation was you. I don't like to think that way because it seems so proudful. Well, it would be if you thought you earned it. But if you acknowledge and accept the fact that you did not earn it, then it's not pride. It's actually humility. What's actually pride is pretending it's not true. Pretending it's not true, that fake pride, modesty, offends God. It's the sin of Esau. It is true. So much so that Peter, Paul, James, John, Moses, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, the angels, all confessed it to be true. They all said, you're the heirs, not us. They were pretty convinced. Imagine how convinced you'd have to be them and be willing to acknowledge that everything you're doing isn't for you. You are not the elected. You're not those who are the actual heirs. You're only ministering to the heirs. Imagine what it would take, how true it would have to be in your mind to be willing to accept that idea. And they embraced it. They had no problem with it. So why can't you embrace what you are? I don't know why God purposed this the way he did? I have no idea. It makes no sense to me. It seems to me he'd be far better off with the prophets than with me. Seems to me I would have gotten to Moses and said, I think we should quit while the quitting's good. Not bad. He made a few mistakes, but hey, it's pretty good. I think we should just wrap it up right now. Let's quit while we're ahead. Elisha, you get Elijah, you think, well, let's try a little more, and then you get Elisha. That's when you say, okay, it's time, it's time to sell. We're at the top of the market. Why are we going to go any further? How much better could it get? God had a purpose throughout all eternity, and it's you. And he does not want you to fake humility and pretend it's not the case. He wants you to accept that by faith. He wants you to praise and honor him because of the election that he made, the choice he made. I don't understand it, but it's true. Paul thought it was true. Peter thought it was true. Moses thought it was true. Everybody thought. The angels all think it's true. It says the angels desire, long to look into the things you hear and know. They're not given access. That's what's true. That's what's real. And Peter is saying in this first part of the epistle, and he's going to get into some application on that later on, but this is the philosophical underpinning of what he's going to talk about later on. If you could just get this point, just embrace this idea, accept it, as hard as it is, and it is incredibly hard to accept. But if you could accept this idea, it will radically transform your life. It will. Because it's an incredible idea. You're the heir. The inheritance is indescribable. And everyone you admire in history as a Christian is merely the executor of that will. All set up for your benefit. You are the beneficiary. All right. So we'll see you next week.